All right, welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works. We take all this great stuff you sent our way, and we try to boil it down to the essentials, you know, uh, make it easy to understand what really matters.
And this time around, we're tackling something pretty fundamental. How your brain actually works, all the stuff going on up there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it affects everything we do, right?
Yeah.
So if we can understand it better, maybe we can focus better, get more done, and maybe even, just deal with everyday stuff a little easier.
And for this deep dive, we're going deep into David Rock's Your Brain at Work, which I gotta say is a fascinating read.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, what's interesting about Rock is that he's not, like a traditional neuroscientist or anything. He was actually a business consultant, which gives him this unique angle.
Absolutely. He came to neuroscience looking for practical tools to improve how people work in organizations. It's not just theory. He wanted real-world strategies.
And he did his homework too, right? I mean, he talked to like 30 top neuroscientists, poured over hundreds of research papers. So we're not just dealing with, like pop psychology here. This is grounded in solid science.
Yeah, no doubt. One of the first things Rock introduces is this idea of a stage for your conscious attention. Imagine like a literal theater stage. Whatever's up on that stage at any given moment, that's what you're actively focused on.
Right. And the performers on that stage can be anything, information coming in from the outside, like what I'm saying to you right now, or things from inside your head, like your own thoughts, memories, stuff you're imagining.
It's the spotlight of your awareness. And understanding the stage is really important because it determines how you process information. You
Yeah.
connect new ideas to what you already know. You weigh different options when making decisions. You're comparing those actors on your mental stage.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But here's where it gets really interesting. This whole conscious thinking thing, running this mental stage, it actually uses up a lot of your brain's resources.
Yeah, we're talking about actual physical energy, like the fuel in your blood.
So it's like your brain actually needs to burn calories to think.
You got it. It's way more energy intensive than those automatic background processes like breathing or, your heart beating. Rock uses the analogy of stage lights needing a lot of power to run.
Ah, that makes sense. And just like a battery, we only have so much mental energy.
Exactly, and it gets depleted throughout the day as we think and make decisions. Which probably explains why you feel so mentally drained at the end of a long day.
Oh, for sure. Or, how much harder it is to focus when you're tired or hungry.
Yeah.
It's not just in our heads. There's a real biological reason for it.
Absolutely. Now, the main energy hog here is your prefrontal cortex, that part of your brain right behind your forehead. It's crucial for planning, making decisions, and controlling impulses.
So it's like the executive control center of our brain, and it guzzles a lot of glucose and oxygen to run. This reminds me of that limited bucket of resources idea from Roy Baumeister.
Yes. Baumeister's research suggests that we only have so much mental energy for tasks that require conscious effort, especially self-control and decision-making. So every decision you make, every impulse you resist, dips into this bucket. And once it's depleted, well, things get harder.
So if I'm, wrestling with a tough decision at work in the morning, I'll be more likely to cave and check social media later on, like my willpower is weaker.
Exactly. And there's a physical basis for this, too. Remember Baumeister's famous lemonade study? People who drank lemonade with real sugar, providing glucose to the brain, performed way better on later mental tasks than those who had the sugar substitute.
Wow, so fueling your brain actually makes a real difference in your thinking.
Absolutely. So this whole idea that we can just power through anything, that willpower is limitless, not really true. Our capacity for high-quality thinking has its limits.
So what you're saying is when you hit that wall mentally, trying harder might not be the answer. It might be time to refuel, step away, give your brain a break.
Exactly. Now, another interesting thing is why certain types of thinking are more draining than others. Rock points out that picturing things we haven't actually seen, like imagining a solution or a future project, takes more mental energy than thinking about problems or things we've experienced.
Really? Why is that?
Well, think about it. When you're thinking about the future, you're essentially creating something new in your mind, something that doesn't exist yet. It's more abstract, you haven't experienced it, so your brain has to work harder to construct that picture. Whereas when you're thinking about a problem, you're drawing on existing memories and experiences.
So it's like the difference between, I don't know, trying to sketch a creature you've only heard described versus drawing something you're actually looking at.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. The first one takes way more effort. Rock uses this analogy of ski slopes. Green runs are easy, blue runs are medium, and black runs are the tough ones. He says that prioritizing, especially in our world with so much information coming at us constantly, is definitely a black run. It requires a lot of mental energy, a fresh and energized mind.
So if you're already mentally drained, trying to prioritize your to-do list is a recipe for disaster. You're setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. And to make those black run tasks a bit easier, Rock suggests using visuals. Mental imagery, metaphors, like the stage idea we've been talking about, even storytelling. These can all help reduce the mental energy needed to process complex information.
Because instead of just trying to juggle abstract concepts in your head, you're engaging the visual parts of your brain. You're giving your prefrontal cortex some help.
Exactly. So two key surprises about how our brain uses energy. One, conscious thinking is way more energy intensive than we realize. And two, those crucial mental activities, like prioritizing, are often the ones that demand the most from us.
Okay, so big takeaway, be mindful of your brain's energy. Now, Rock also offers some things to try, practical tips for managing this better. What are some of those?
Well, the first one is pretty straightforward. Treat your conscious thinking as a limited resource and look for ways to conserve it. Prioritize those mentally demanding tasks when your mind is fresh and alert.
Don't try to plan your week on a Friday afternoon when you're already fried.
Exactly. Save that mental energy for when you really need it. And to do that, try to minimize those energy-draining activities like constantly checking emails or social media, especially when you need to focus.
Yeah, those can really suck the life out of you mentally. Schedule those things for times when you know you're not going to be doing your most important work.
Another tip, don't just try to memorize everything. Actively engage with information, create mental pictures, make lists, use whatever helps you offload some of that storage demand on your brain. And finally, try scheduling blocks of time for different types of thinking. Your brain has different needs at different times. Sometimes you need intense focus. Other times you might benefit from a more relaxed, diffuse state.
Like, don't expect to do deep creative work right after a meeting where you had to process a ton of information.
Yeah, give your brain a chance to shift gears. Okay, so we've talked about energy. Now let's dive into the limitations of working memory and attention. It's another area where what feels intuitive isn't always accurate.
You mean like that whole we can hold 7 things in our working memory thing?
Exactly. Turns out that's a bit of a myth. More recent research suggests that the actual capacity is closer to 4 items, and even that depends on how complex those items are.
So 4 numbers are easier than 4 random words, and 4 sentences are even tougher, unless they're really simple and related.
Right. It explains why meetings can feel so overwhelming sometimes. We're trying to hold on to all these complex ideas at once, and our short-term memory just isn't built for that.
I've definitely been in those meetings where I feel like my brain is about to explode.
And it gets even more interesting. Brian McElree's research found that we can only accurately remember one completely new piece of information, or chunk, without any detail loss. We can hold more, sure, but the accuracy of our recall drops with each additional item.
Wow, only one. So with all the information bombarding us every day, we're really only processing that first, most immediate thing with full clarity.
That's the key takeaway. And when we're actively engaged in conscious tasks, our brain operates sequentially one thing at a time. This is different from when we're passively taking in information, like when you're scanning a room looking for someone.
So it's like a single-lane road versus a multi-lane highway.
Pretty much. And this sequential processing explains why multitasking, when both tasks require conscious attention, is so inefficient. Harold Pashler's research showed that trying to do 2 cognitive tasks at once can significantly decrease overall mental capacity. He even said it was like dropping from an MBA level to an 8-year-old.
Ouch, that's a pretty harsh comparison. Didn't he do that experiment with a flashing light and naming colors?
Yeah, that's the one. People had to press a button depending on where a light flashed and simultaneously say the color of a word that appeared. And even with these simple tasks, doing both at once led to slower reaction times and more errors. And practice didn't really eliminate this fundamental limitation.
So if you want to be accurate and efficient, don't try to truly multitask when both tasks require real brain power.
Exactly. But let's be realistic. In the real world, we often have to juggle multiple things. So how do we manage this? Rock offers 3 strategies.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me how to juggle better.
The first is to embed or automate routine tasks. The second is to organize information effectively so your conscious mind can process it better. And the third is to be more intentional about how you mix up your attention.
Okay, let's start with embedding tasks. How does that work?
Well, when you practice something repeatedly, it becomes embedded. It shifts from being controlled by your energy-hungry prefrontal cortex to being handled by the basal ganglia, a different part of your brain that's much more efficient. Think about learning to ride a bike or type. At first, you're consciously thinking about every movement, but eventually it becomes automatic.
So you're creating these ingrained if-then rules in your brain,
Mm.
and your basal ganglia can just execute them without needing your conscious attention.
Exactly. The basal ganglia are like masters of executing well-learned patterns. So, develop routines for those common repetitive tasks, how you process emails, organize files, even start your workday. The less you have to think about those things, the more brain power you have for other stuff.
But this doesn't apply to those complex, higher-level tasks, right?
Right. Things like strategic planning or creative problem solving, those still need your prefrontal cortex. But even those little things like learning keyboard shortcuts can add up.
Okay, so automate what you can. What about this mixing up your attention thing?
It's about consciously deciding how long you'll divide your attention before returning to focused work. Set boundaries. Instead of reacting to every notification, check your email or messages at specific times.
Be more proactive. Don't let yourself get pulled in a million directions.
Exactly. So, key takeaways on attention. We can only truly focus on one demanding task at a time. Switching tasks costs energy and increases errors. Doing two conscious tasks simultaneously really hurts performance. And multitasking is only efficient when one of the tasks is an embedded automatic routine.
All right, some solid advice there. What are some specific things to try for managing attention?
First, catch yourself multitasking those attention-heavy tasks and consciously slow down, focus on one at a time. Second, identify those repetitive tasks and work on embedding them through practice. Third, think about the order you approach tasks to avoid mental bottlenecks. And finally, if you must multitask, combine demanding tasks with those automatic routines.
Okay, so we've covered energy and attention. Now let's talk about something we all deal with: distractions and those moments when our stress levels spike.
Distractions, whether they're external, like those constant notifications, or internal, like our own wandering thoughts, they really take a toll on our productivity.
I read that the average office worker loses something like 25 minutes to distractions every day, and it takes even longer to get back on track after an interruption.
It's crazy, right? And it seems like they're getting worse. Even Microsoft, in their research on workplace efficiency, found that even small distractions can really throw us off, especially when we're working on something new or complex.
It's like trying to build a house of cards while someone's poking at it.
Perfect analogy. Now, to understand this better, Rock talks about our brain's braking system, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, or VLPFC. It's a part of that prefrontal cortex we talked about, and it's crucial for controlling impulses and maintaining focus.
So it helps us resist distractions and stay on task.
Exactly. But unlike a car's brakes, which need to be super strong and reliable, our brain's braking system is kind of fragile and easily overwhelmed, and it uses up a lot of energy, so it works best in short bursts.
Which explains why sometimes we can resist that urge to check our phone and other times we just cave.
Exactly. Now let's talk about arousal, that state of alertness and readiness. There's this concept called the inverted U model that describes how our level of arousal impacts our performance.
Like too little arousal and you're bored and unmotivated, too much and you're stressed and can't think straight.
Exactly. There's a sweet spot of moderate arousal where we're focused and performing at our best. Like when Paul was driving and had to navigate those unfamiliar streets to get to his presentation, the pressure of being late actually helped him focus.
But then he started to panic, missed his turn, and it all went downhill.
Exactly. That's when the arousal goes beyond the sweet spot and becomes counterproductive.
So deadlines can be motivating, but too much pressure can backfire.
Absolutely. Amy Arnsten's research on dopamine and norepinephrine in the prefrontal cortex is really helpful here. These chemicals are crucial for our brain cells to communicate effectively.
And we need just the right amount of them. Too little, and we're under-aroused, bored. Too much, and we're over-aroused, stressed, and our neural connections get messed up.
Right. It's a delicate balance. But the good news is that we can influence these levels. Remember Paul? He could have managed his presentation jitters by focusing on the positive outcomes, which would have boosted dopamine.
Instead of dwelling on what could go wrong, focus on what could go right.
And Rock suggests that positive expectations and even humor can be more effective for generating arousal than focusing on fear. Positive emotions boost dopamine, while fear can decrease it and trigger negative stress chemicals.
So instead of psyching yourself out, Try to pump yourself up.
Exactly. But we also have to be aware of over-arousal, whether it's from information overload or just too much pressure. It can really shut down clear thinking.
It's about finding that individual sweet spot, that flow state.
Ah, yes, flow, that state of being completely absorbed in something where time seems to disappear. It's that perfect balance between challenge and skill where you're fully engaged but not overwhelmed.
Like being in the zone, completely focused and energized.
Exactly. So, to sum up, our prefrontal cortex needs the right levels of dopamine and norepinephrine to function at its best, and we have some control over those levels.
Okay, that's a lot to digest about how our brain handles stress and distractions. Now, let's shift gears to something that often feels mysterious: creativity and those aha moments of insight.
I love talking about insight. It may seem like magic, but there's some fascinating neuroscience behind it. And in today's world, creativity is more important than ever, even in roles that aren't traditionally seen as creative.
We need to solve new problems, come up with new ideas, think outside the box.
Exactly. And Rock talks about those moments when we get stuck, like Emily struggling with that complex sustainability terminology.
She was hitting a wall, completely stumped.
And research shows that overcoming these mental impasses often requires us to actively suppress our existing ways of thinking to allow new ideas to emerge. It's about inhibiting those old thought patterns, making space for something new.
So if we're stuck, the answer isn't always to just think harder.
Sometimes it's about stepping back, letting go of that intense focus. Interestingly, research also suggests that collaboration between people with different levels of knowledge can lead to faster breakthroughs. Diverse perspectives can help shake us out of our mental ruts.
Like two heads are better than one.
Sometimes, yes. And Beeman's research shows that intense focus and anxiety can actually hinder insight. So when you're stuck, take a break, do something else you enjoy, and let your mind wander a bit.
It's that classic shower thought phenomenon. The solution pops into your head when you're relaxed and not actively thinking about the problem.
Exactly. So some key takeaways on insight. 1, it's surprisingly easy to get stuck. 2, overcoming those mental blocks often requires letting your mind wander and reducing the activation of those wrong solutions you're fixated on. 3, insights tend to happen when your mind is quiet and making loose connections between seemingly unrelated things. 4, relaxation and positive mood can actually boost insights. And 5, the right hemisphere of your brain, which is all about making connections, plays a big role.
So instead of forcing it, create the right mental environment for those aha moments to occur naturally.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about the social side of our brain. We're incredibly social creatures, and understanding how our brains work in social situations is crucial, especially at work.
This is where social cognitive neuroscience comes in. It looks at how our brains process things like empathy, fairness, and even how we understand ourselves in relation to others.
And what's fascinating is that many of the same brain regions are active when we're trying to understand someone else as when we're reflecting on ourselves. There's this deep connection between social awareness and self-awareness. And in this realm, mindfulness has some really interesting implications.
Mindfulness, you mean, like paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Yes. And research has shown that higher levels of mindfulness are linked to better psychological well-being, physical health, and even stronger relationships.
There's even some evidence that it can help with things like healing skin conditions and reducing depression relapse.
Absolutely. It's more than just relaxation. One study even found that mindfulness meditation led to improved immune function and lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol.
Wow, so it has real physiological effects. How does it actually work in the brain?
Well, FARB's research suggests that we have two distinct ways of processing experiences using different brain networks. One is called the default mode network. It's active when we're not focused on an external task and are engaged in internal thoughts, mind-wandering, planning, thinking about ourselves and others. It's that constant internal narrative.
Like our inner monologue, all those thoughts about the past, future, and our social lives.
Right. The other network is the experiential network, or present moment awareness network. It kicks in when we're directly experiencing sensory information without getting caught up in thoughts about the past, future, or ourselves.
So instead of thinking about how the breeze feels, you're just feeling it.
Exactly. And Siegel suggests that practicing mindfulness can actually help us reshape our neural pathways, increasing our capacity for self-regulation and change. The more we understand our brain, its attention span, its reward systems, how insight works, the more opportunities we have to be mindful, not just during meditation, but in everyday life.
Bringing that mindfulness to our work, our conversations, everything we do.
Now we're moving into Act 2 of Rock's book, Staying cool under pressure, because everything our brain does is ultimately about survival.
It's constantly scanning for threats and rewards, and this affects our thoughts and emotions. So managing those emotions is crucial.
Right. Our limbic system, that more primitive part of our brain, is constantly making those split-second toward or away decisions based on perceived threats and rewards. And this even happens in response to how pleasant or unpleasant sounds are, even in made-up words.
So our brains are wired to react emotionally to things, even if they don't make sense logically.
Exactly. And when we experience emotions, our limbic system lights up, including the hippocampus, which stores memories, and the amygdala, our brain's alarm system.
So strong emotions can really hijack our brains.
They can. And anxiety in particular can mess with our thinking because of something called the attentional blink. That's the tiny gap our brain needs to process one thing before it can register another. When we're anxious, we tend to get stuck in our heads and miss things happening around us.
So we literally become less aware of our surroundings when we're stressed. What can we do about this?
One technique Rock suggests is symbolic labeling, which is simply finding the right word to describe the emotion you're feeling. When your limbic system is going haywire, it's like it's hogging all the resources, leaving less for your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part. But increasing activity in your prefrontal cortex can actually calm down the limbic system.
So by naming the emotion, you're engaging your thinking brain and giving it more control.
Exactly. And research shows that just labeling an emotion can reduce activity in the amygdala, the fear center. Another key factor in staying calm is feeling in control, having a sense of autonomy. Even small increases in autonomy can be very rewarding and buffer against stress.
Like those studies about small business owners valuing their independence, or retirement home residents who had more choices being happier and healthier. We all crave that feeling of control.
Absolutely. Now, for those bigger emotional hits, Rock talks about cognitive reappraisal, which is reframing or reinterpreting a situation.
So instead of getting swept away by your initial emotional reaction, you consciously choose to see it differently.
Exactly. Research has shown that reappraisal can be more powerful than just labeling an emotion. Kevin Oxner's work has looked at this in detail, like those studies where people were shown emotionally charged images and asked to reinterpret them. For example, seeing people crying outside a church and thinking, oh, it's a wedding, they're tears of joy, instead of assuming it's a funeral.
And when they change their interpretation, their emotional response changed too, and their brains showed less activity in the emotional centers.
Exactly. It's not about suppressing your feelings, but about changing the underlying thought that's driving them. And Rock says we actually use reappraisal all the time, often unconsciously. But understanding how it works can help us use it more intentionally and effectively.
So instead of being a slave to your emotions, you become the master.
Exactly. And Rock calls reappraisal a killer app for emotional regulation. It helps us get to that optimal level of arousal where we can think clearly under pressure. And he suggests that humor can be a kind of cheap reappraisal. It shifts our perspective without requiring a lot of effort.
Like sometimes you just need to laugh at the absurdity of a situation to take the edge off.
Now let's talk about the power of expectations. Our brains respond to the anticipation of a reward in a similar way to actually receiving the reward. Positive expectations signal that something good is coming, and that releases dopamine.
So looking forward to something can actually make us feel good.
It can. But here's the thing, unexpected rewards have a much stronger positive impact than expected ones. And when an expected reward doesn't come through, there's a big drop in dopamine, which can feel really disappointing.
Like when you're super excited about something and then it falls through, it's a real bummer.
Exactly. Even small, unmet expectations, like hitting every red light on your way to work, can lower dopamine and trigger that away response. That's where reappraisal can come in handy.
Okay, so manage your expectations. Don't set yourself up for disappointment.
And on the flip side, being in a positive mood can actually create an upward spiral. It broadens our perception, improves problem solving, and sparks creativity. It seems like there's a strong link between positive expectations, dopamine, and how we see the world.
So happy people are more creative and adaptable.
It seems that way. Positive emotions literally open up our minds. Okay, so to recap, staying cool under pressure. We've got labeling our emotions for those everyday bumps, reappraisal for the bigger hits, and managing expectations to avoid those negative spikes.
And a strong director that self-awareness and conscious control is key to using these techniques effectively.
Now, let's move on to Act 3. Collaborate with others. Rock argues that understanding some basic social needs of our brain can help us navigate interpersonal challenges more effectively.
Because beyond our basic needs for food and shelter, we have these deeper social needs, like feeling connected, being treated fairly, having a sense of status. And when those needs aren't met, it can create conflict.
Exactly. We're social creatures, and a lot of our brain power is dedicated to understanding and navigating the social world.
So it's not just about being nice, it's about how our brains are wired.
Exactly. And to understand this better, Rock introduces the SCAR-ARF model. It outlines 5 social domains that drive our behavior: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness.
Okay, let's break those down. Status is our sense of importance relative to others. Certainty is about being able to predict what's going to happen. Autonomy is our need for control and choice. Relatedness is feeling connected to others. And fairness is being treated justly.
Perfect. Now, think about Paul's reaction to Ned's request for more work. It likely triggered a threat response in Paul, maybe related to fairness or autonomy. Research shows that we react very strongly to perceived unfairness, even when it might be in our best interest to just go along with it.
Like in that ultimatum game study, people would rather get nothing than accept an unfair offer.
Exactly. And overcoming that negative reaction often involves consciously regulating our emotions. Remember, labeling and reappraisal. And the way something is framed can also affect our perception of fairness, like when Ned pointed out that his work could save Paul money.
So it's not just what you say, but how you say it.
Absolutely. And on the positive side, Paul's interaction with Michelle likely boosted their sense of relatedness, creating a more positive dynamic. Some key insights about fairness. It's a primary reward and threat for our social brain. Our reactions to kindness and betrayal are linked to our expectations of fairness. Accepting unfairness often requires emotional regulation, and there can be gender differences in how we respond to unfairness.
Now let's talk about status. Rock says that feeling like our status is being threatened can trigger strong, lasting threat responses.
Absolutely. Think about how hard it can be to admit we're wrong, especially at work. It often feels like a hit to our status.
Like we'd rather cling to a bad idea than admit we made a mistake.
Exactly. Now, to manage status effectively, we can do things like lowering our own status when appropriate, for example, by admitting a mistake, and raising the status of others through positive feedback and recognition, especially publicly.
So acknowledge your own fallibility and celebrate the successes of others.
But Rock cautions that giving positive feedback can sometimes feel threatening to someone if they have a weak director and see it as changing their relative status. And that might explain why some managers focus on pointing out faults rather than highlighting strengths.
Because it feels safer to focus on what's wrong than to acknowledge what's right.
Possibly. Rock also talks about playing against yourself, focusing on improving your own personal best as a way to boost status without threatening others. Interestingly, research suggests that our awareness of self and others develops together using the same brain circuits.
So improving yourself can actually make you better at understanding and interacting with others.
Exactly. Now let's look at how Emily applied some of these SCARF principles. Remember that tense conference call? It seems like status was a key factor there. Emily realized that her actions had inadvertently made Colin feel less valued, like his status had been diminished.
And instead of getting defensive, she addressed it directly, acknowledged his feelings, and took responsibility for her mistake.
Exactly. By lowering her own status, admitting her fallibility, she raised Colin's status, which helped diffuse the situation. It's a very different approach from that arsenic sandwich feedback method.
Where you sandwich criticism between two pieces of praise.
Right. Rock argues that even constructive feedback can be perceived as a threat to status, triggering defensiveness.
So even if your intentions are good, the way you deliver feedback can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Now, how can we facilitate positive change in others more effectively? Rock emphasizes focusing on solutions rather than problems.
He uses that great analogy of trying to hail a taxi. When you focus on getting a taxi, you're more likely to notice one. It's about priming your brain to look for opportunities.
Exactly. Focusing on desired outcomes has a powerful effect on the brain. It activates the right hemisphere, which is linked to insight, and releases dopamine, creating a toward state that's more conducive to problem solving.
So instead of dwelling on what's wrong, focus on what you want to achieve.
But Rock points out that our brains tend to gravitate towards problems because solutions involve uncertainty, which can feel threatening.
We're wired to avoid potential threats.
Right. So we sometimes need to consciously direct our attention and the attention of others towards solutions. Remember how Paul changed his approach with Eric? Instead of criticizing, he asked questions that guided Eric towards identifying his own mistakes and solutions.
And that led to Eric having an aha moment, realizing what he'd done wrong and coming up with his solution.
Exactly. And these moments of insight are often associated with increased neural synchrony, where different parts of the brain involved in the task become more connected.
So our brains literally light up when we have those aha moments.
They do. Now, how could Emily have used these scarf principles with her kids?
Well, she could boost their sense of status by treating them as capable and responsible, ensure fairness in how she handles situations, give them choices to increase autonomy, spend quality time with them to strengthen relatedness, and set clear expectations to provide certainty.
And even in simple conversations, the way we phrase things can make a big difference. Instead of saying, I want you to do this, try asking, would you be willing to help with this? It taps into their sense of autonomy and status.
So it's about framing requests in a way that acknowledges their needs and values.
And remember, linking any desired change to those social rewards, even just the anticipation of a positive outcome, can boost focus and motivation. Setting goals that offer opportunities for small wins can increase status. Clear steps towards goals increase certainty, and allowing input in how goals are achieved fosters autonomy. It's also interesting that we tend to set away goals, focusing on what we want to avoid more often than toward goals, which focus on what we want to achieve.
Maybe because our brains are wired to focus on threats.
Probably. But toward goals tend to be more motivating and create more positive emotions. And finally, remember that idea of attention density.
Like if you want a plant to thrive, you need to water it regularly.
Exactly. Consistent attention is key to growing those new neural connections, those new habits and ways of thinking.
We see this in Emily and Paul's evening. Emily connected with her mother, getting a dopamine boost from that social interaction. They clearly communicated the new plan to their family, involving the kids in creating reminders, which increased certainty and autonomy. And even the kids spontaneously offering to help clean up suggests a more positive toward state and a connection to fairness.
Exactly. And it all comes back to having a strong director. That conscious awareness and ability to manage your mental resources, it makes everything easier managing attention, prioritizing effectively, quieting your mind to notice subtle cues, and navigating social situations with greater skill.
So to wrap up this deep dive, the key takeaway is this. Understanding your brain, its energy needs, its attentional limits, our social drives, and the power of conscious control empowers you to navigate challenges and perform better in all areas of life.
Think about that stage metaphor for your attention. What's on your stage right now? How can you manage those limited mental resources more effectively?
And consider the scarf model in your own interactions. Where can you increase?